The cake was 3 tiers: ivory fondant, blue buttercream stars, a little astronaut on top that Beckett had picked from a Fifth Avenue bakery 3 weeks before his 7th birthday. He had pointed at it with both hands and said, "Mom, that one. That one looks like it can fly anywhere." Marlowe had paid for it with the $40 she kept folded inside her running shoe. The only money in this house Theron didn't control. 30 guests filled the Greenwich living room. Children ran between the chairs. A string quartet played in the corner. Theron believed even a child's birthday should look like a magazine spread. The house smelled like gardenias and buttercream. Everything was perfect. It always was. Marlowe stood near the doorway, watching Beckett chase his best friend across the hardwood floor, and let herself, for one moment, feel uncomplicated joy. Her son had her eyes, dark brown, wide open, trusting. She had spent 7 years keeping his world safe enough for those eyes to stay that way. Her phone buzzed. One word from an unknown number. "Ready." She stepped into the garden. April air, cold. She pressed the phone to her ear. "We're in position," the voice said. "All units." "Not yet," she said quietly. "He has to do it himself. On camera, in front of witnesses." She hung up, turned around. Theron was in the doorway. He had seen the phone. She could tell by the jaw and that specific tightening she had learned to read across 11 years the way a sailor reads weather. "Who were you talking to?" "A friend. I needed air." He crossed the garden in 4 steps, took her wrist. She didn't pull away. She walked back inside ahead of him, into the warmth, back to the music, back to the 30 witnesses, and to the camera above the fireplace that Dex Morrow had repositioned 2 days ago to capture the dining table at the exact right angle. Beckett stood before his cake, paper crown slightly crooked. "Mommy, you're back." She smiled, a real one, because what she was about to allow was the last terrible thing she would ever permit this man to do to her. Someone started singing Happy Birthday. Beckett squeezed his eyes shut to make a wish. And then Theron grabbed the back of her head and pushed her face into the 3-tier birthday cake. In front of 30 guests, in front of his own son, in front of a camera he had no idea was watching. The room went silent. Not the uncertain kind. The kind that falls when something crosses a line that cannot be uncrossed. A child made a small sound, and a woman near the window covered her mouth. And Marlowe, slowly, deliberately, raised her head, blue frosting above her brow, and did not look at Theron. She looked at Beckett. And somewhere behind the front door, 41 people waited for her signal. Marlowe lifted her face slowly. She did not raise a hand to wipe the frosting. She did not look at Theron. She looked at Beckett, paper crown, candles still burning, eyes filling with something a 7-year-old should never feel at his own birthday party. She gave him one small nod. "I'm okay. I'm right here." Before you understand what happened next, you need to understand how Marlowe Vess became Marlowe Cade. She met Theron at a Manhattan fundraiser when she was 27. He was 32, charming, interested in what she said, funny in a way that didn't feel performed. When he asked about her students, she taught 3rd grade in Brooklyn then, with what felt like genuine curiosity. She drove home thinking, he's nothing like I expected. He wasn't. Not in any way she'd hoped for. The changes came slowly. They always do when someone is being patient about it. First, the job. Wouldn't it be wonderful if she were home more? He was building his practice. A present partner mattered. She stopped teaching, told herself it was temporary. Second, the money. He was better with finances. Wouldn't it make more sense for him to manage accounts? She had a card, a generous allowance. told herself it was practical. Third, the distance. Her parents were too involved. Her mother called too often. Her father had opinions that were none of his business. The visits stopped. She told herself she was protecting the peace. By the time Beckett was born, Marlowe had become someone she wouldn't have recognized at 27. No income, no independent accounts, no close friends nearby, and a father she hadn't spoken to in 4 years. A beautiful house on 3 acres in Greenwich. A husband who had never once struck her, not with his hands. He didn't need to. The erosion was quieter than that, more patient. Theron used Beckett as emotional leverage, financial dependency as a cage, and social isolation as its lock. He built the system one reasonable-sounding decision at a time, and it had worked completely for 11 years. To Gross, what Theron never accounted for was this. The woman he was managing had a father who had been watching every move he made since the year Marlowe stopped returning calls, and who had been building a case with the precision and patience of someone who knew exactly how this kind of man expected to win. 3 years before the birthday party, the Wall Street Journal ran a headline: Vess, Capital founder, files for Chapter 11. Theron read it at his midtown desk and felt something he hadn't felt in years: relief. He called Marlowe that evening, casual, measured. "I heard about your father, that's a shame." He watched her face. She hadn't known. He'd seen the article before she had. "I should call him," she said. "Of course," Theron said, "though he may ask for money. We're not in a position for that." Said gently, reasonably, then she didn't call. What Theron didn't know, what no one outside a 4-person circle knew, was that Stellan Vess had filed that bankruptcy on purpose. Callum Reese, Stellan's trusted attorney, had structured the entire proceeding over 14 months. The real assets, 3 commercial properties in Boston and Philadelphia, and a private portfolio worth $340 million, had been legally transferred into a separate trust before the filing. The bankruptcy was real on paper only. It was designed to accomplish one specific thing: make Theron believe the threat was gone. Because Stellan had known for 3 years that his son-in-law was dangerous, not in the way that leaves marks. It started with a phone call from Odette. She had heard Theron speak to Marlowe at Christmas, quietly, and when he thought she was out of earshot, in a tone Odette described as the way a man talks to something he owns. Stellan hung up and called Callum Reese the next morning. "We document everything," Stellan said. "Slowly, correctly. When we move, we don't miss." Callum brought in Dex Morrow, private investigator, former NYPD financial crimes. Over 26 months, Dex built a file. $2.4 million redirected from Marlowe's grandmother's estate into 3 Delaware shell companies. Documented financial coercion, falsified client documents, and testimony from 2 former clients who'd been defrauded. And then Callum found something else: a wire transfer to an account in Juniper Lane's name. $85,000, 14 months prior, memo line reading agreement, mutual terms. Juniper Lane wasn't just Theron's girlfriend. She was a junior attorney at a firm currently litigating a case in which Stellan Vess was named as a witness. And someone had been leaking confidential case information to Theron's legal team for over a year. Theron Cade's public life was architecture. The Midtown office, 32nd floor, Hudson Views, Georgetown law degree in dark walnut, a client list that included 2 former senators, a tech founder, and a hedge fund manager named Preston Graves. He was genuinely good at his job. That part was real. He had a mind that moved fast and a voice juries trusted. He'd built 14 years of success by understanding precisely which version of the truth a room needed to hear. His private life ran on the same principle. Different audience, same method, and what his colleagues didn't know. Preston Graves had been investigated 3 years ago for securities fraud. The case was dropped. Theron had negotiated the outcome, outside of any official proceeding, in ways that were never disclosed. 18 days after the case closed, Graves transferred $4 million to a private account Theron held at a Cayman Islands bank. Dex Morrow found the transfer after 11 months and one source inside the bank's compliance department. What this meant was that Theron's exposure extended far beyond what he'd done to Marlowe. The shell companies, the estate theft, the Juniper payment, those were serious. The Graves transaction was federal, a different category entirely. Theron didn't know any of this. He was confident the way men are confident when they've never been caught. Then he had managed everything: Marlowe, his career, the money, Juniper. With the same cool precision he brought to cross-examination. He was careful. He checked his tracks. And it had worked. For 11 years, completely. Which is why the birthday party felt safe. Which is why, when he saw Marlowe on that phone in the garden, what he reached for was not fear. It was anger. Because in his world, Marlowe did not have phone calls he didn't know about. Marlowe's small, managed life had no spaces he hadn't approved. He hadn't planned what he did at that table. That was the only thing in the entire operation he hadn't planned. It happened because, for one unguarded second, Theron Cade stopped being a strategist and became what he actually was. The man who controls every exit forgets to watch the one behind him, and then behind him, for 14 months. 41 people had been preparing to walk through it. 14 months before the party, a package arrived at the Greenwich house. Amazon delivery, 2 novels and a certification study guide Marlowe had told Theron she was considering. He had approved it. Anything that kept her quietly occupied was fine. She opened the box alone in the kitchen, novels on top, study guide underneath, and beneath that, wrapped in notebook paper, an iPhone SE, prepaid, fully charged. 1 contact saved. Her mother's handwriting on the note said only, "When you're ready." Marlowe stood at the kitchen window, looking at the driveway, the 3 manicured acres, the garden where she wasn't allowed to plant anything Theron considered untidy. And then she tucked the phone into her winter coat and walked it upstairs into the back of her closet, inside an old boot she hadn't worn since before Beckett. She didn't call the number for 6 weeks. When she did, it was 3 in the morning. Theron was in the city, Beckett asleep down the hall, the house quiet in the way that felt more like held breath than peace. Her father answered on the second ring. "I've been waiting." No accusation. Plain truth. "I know," she said. "Are you safe right now?" "Yes." "Then we have time to do this right." 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When it ended, Marlowe knew 3 things she hadn't known before. Her father had never stopped watching. Callum Reese had been building a legal case for over 2 years. And the bankruptcy, the thing that had made her feel most alone, had been a shield, not a wound. And Stellan had made himself look powerless so Theron would stop being careful. The next day, Marlowe began her own documentation. She photographed financial statements. She recorded 2 kitchen arguments using the iPhone in her coat pocket. She kept notes in a crossword book, writing in the margins so the pages looked like puzzles. She noted dates, amounts, exact words. She was not trained for this. She was a 3rd-grade teacher from Brooklyn. But she found the first shell company in month 3, then the second. And when she found the 3rd, registered in Delaware under a rearrangement of Beckett's full legal name, she sat very still on the closet floor, because she understood then that this had never been only about controlling her. It had been about stealing from her son. And a mother who discovers that particular truth does not stay still for long. Callum Reese had an office on the 44th floor of a Park Avenue building that Marlowe visited for the first time on a Tuesday in January, while Theron was at a New Jersey deposition and Beckett was at school. She took the subway in from Greenwich, paid cash, wore a coat she hadn't touched in 3 years. She hadn't been in a law office as anything but a spouse in 11 years. Callum was mid-40s, with the quiet of someone who listens more than they speak. He had a MacBook Pro open and a legal pad with organized handwriting and a coffee from downstairs he hadn't touched. He stood when she walked in. "Your father talks about you every time I see him," he said. She sat. "What do we have?" He turned the MacBook toward her. For 2 hours, our Callum walked her through the case. Shell companies, estate transfers, the Juniper Lane payment, the Graves transaction. He showed her the timeline, the evidence structure, what a federal investigation would look like once the Graves material reached the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York. Then he showed her the gap. "Everything we have is financial," Callum said. "It's strong. In a civil proceeding, you win. In a federal case, Theron faces serious exposure. But in a custody proceeding, a competent attorney will argue that financial misconduct doesn't make someone an unfit parent. Theron will have a very competent attorney. What do we need? A behavioral incident, witnessed, on record, demonstrating a pattern of control and aggression, not in private, but documented, on in front of people who are not in his employ, no ambiguity." Marlowe looked at him for a moment. "Beckett's birthday," she said. 3 months. Callum was careful. "Nothing about this strategy involves manufacturing an incident. Theron's behavior is Theron's behavior. We simply need to ensure the next time it occurs in a fully documented environment." "He always loses control when he thinks I'm hiding something," she said. "I don't need to manufacture anything. I need to be on a phone call he doesn't know about, in front of people, with the right camera angle." She set Dex Morrow's card on the desk. Callum picked it up, nodded once. What neither of them said, but both understood, was that the hardest part wouldn't be the logistics. It would be asking Marlowe to stand still and let it happen. And looking at her across that desk, Callum saw she had already made that peace long before she walked through his door. 10 days before Beckett's birthday, the secret iPhone lit up with a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer. She picked up on the 4th ring. "Is this Marlowe Cade?" The voice was female, careful, like someone walking on ice they weren't sure would hold. "Who is this?" "My name is Juniper Lane." Marlowe sat down on the edge of the bed. Her heart rate stayed even. She had expected many things during 14 months of preparation. She had not expected this call from this person 10 days before everything was supposed to move. "Why are you calling me?" "Because he lied to me too." The voice cracked slightly, then steadied. "He told me you had a dead marriage, that the divorce was 6 months away, for 18 straight months. I found the account." "Which one?" Silence. Then, "You know about the accounts?" "I know about 3 of them. Which one did you find?" When Juniper spoke again, the rehearsed speech was gone. "There's a 4th. Cayman Islands. Bigger than the others. He kept opening documents on his personal drive. I have access to his personal drive." Marlowe's mind moved through it fast. Juniper could be sincere. Juniper could be a plant, Theron testing her, checking how much she knew. Either way, a 4th account, if real, was significant. The Graves transfer. Callum needed this. Why come to me? Marlowe asked. Because I'm not protected the way you are. I have one piece of evidence in a very small window, and I think he knows I know. A pause. I think I'm not as safe as I believed I was. 3 breaths. Marlowe made her decision. Send me the documentation tonight. This number. Don't contact me through any other channel. She stopped. If this is real, I'll make sure you're protected. If it's not, it's real, Juniper said, flat, tired. I promise you. The documentation arrived at 11:47 p.m. Marlowe sent it to Callum with one line. 4th account. Caymans. Confirm with Dex before Saturday. Dex confirmed it by Friday morning. But what Dex found when he pulled the thread on the 4th account wasn't just more money. It was a second signatory. Someone authorized to access the funds for 4 years. And that name belonged to someone inside the Vess family that Marlowe had trusted completely. The second signatory on Theron's Cayman account was named Garrett Vess, Marlowe's first cousin, 39 years old. A quiet man who had worked as a portfolio manager at Vess Capital for 11 years. Someone who had attended Beckett's first birthday. Who had hugged Marlowe at her grandmother's funeral and said family was everything. Dex sent the documentation to Callum on Friday. Callum called Stellan. Stellan's response was the quietest Callum had heard from him in 20 years. Not shocked, processing. Then, after a long pause, how long? At least 4 years, possibly from the beginning. Garrett had been Theron's inside source. He had fed Vess Capital information to Theron since before the fake bankruptcy, possibly helping him understand exactly which assets were real. He had known about the staged collapse and said nothing. He had watched his cousin's marriage deteriorate, attended family dinners, and brought Beckett birthday gifts, and said nothing. For 4 years, $12,000 a month, deposited in increments just under the reporting threshold. Callum called Marlowe at 8:15 a.m. Saturday, 2 days before the party. We have a problem and a solution, he said. The problem is your cousin. The solution is that his involvement makes the federal case significantly stronger. Theron wasn't just committing fraud against you. He was running a coordinated scheme using an insider to undermine a legitimate business. That is a different federal charge. Does Garrett know we know? Marlowe asked. Not yet, and we need to keep it that way until after Monday. She was quiet. She was standing in the kitchen, looking through the window at the backyard where Beckett set up his telescope on clear nights. He had inherited that from Stellan. The patience to look at something for a long time without needing it to move. What about Soren? She asked. Her brother. She had seen his car parked 3 blocks from her house twice in the last month. Callum paused. Your brother has been coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office for 6 weeks. Monday is not just a civil proceeding. Marlowe set her coffee down. So, when Theron walks into that party, she said, he's not walking into a divorce. No, Callum said. Then we're ready, she said. And she went upstairs to choose what she would wear to her son's birthday party, selecting, with great care, a white dress. Because white showed everything. And Marlowe had decided that on Monday there would be nothing left to hide. Marlowe was up at 5. Not because she couldn't sleep, she had slept deeply. For the first time in months. She needed the quiet. She stood in the kitchen with coffee and watched the Connecticut sky move from black to gray to the thin cold blue of early April. A cardinal landed on the fence post, red against the pale morning, and stayed a full minute before flying off. She thought about who she had been at 27. Writing lesson plans for 3rd graders she hadn't met yet, believing completely that the shape of her life would be defined by what she chose to give it. She still believed that. just differently now. At 6:30, small feet on the stairs. Beckett appeared in the doorway in pajamas, hair going in 4 directions, and announced, "It's my birthday." Not a question, a fact he was reporting with great seriousness. "It is." She opened her arms. He walked into them. She held him the way you hold someone when you know the world around them is about to shift and you want them to have one completely untouched moment first. "Is Dad getting balloons?" he asked against her shoulder. "They're already here. I did them last night." He pulled back and looked at her. "You did them yourself?" "I did." He considered this gravely, as if it confirmed something important about her, then went upstairs to watch cartoons. She listened to his feet on the steps, counting without meaning to, a habit she'd developed when he was very small, learning the specific sound of him moving through the world. Theron came down at 8. Good mood. He had closed a case the day before and wore the particular ease of a man who feels untouchable. He kissed her cheek, made coffee, said the caterers should arrive at 11. She nodded and handed him toast, watched him scroll through his phone at the kitchen island. He had no idea, not cruelty on her part. Just the vertiginous truth of knowing something the person across from you doesn't. Something already in motion, already irreversible, already arriving. At 10:15, while Theron dressed upstairs, she sent one text to Callum. "Morning. All clear. See you soon." His reply came in 40 seconds. "We're already in position." She put the phone away, straightened her white dress in the hallway mirror, and went to let the caterers in, thinking, with a steadiness earned one very hard day at a time, that today was the last morning she would ever spend managing someone else's version of her life. 2 hours into the party, Marlowe stepped outside. She had timed it precisely, caterers clearing the appetizer course, and children in the backyard with an entertainer. Theron across the room with a glass of scotch and a firm partner, in the expansive, self-assured mode that required an audience. She excused herself quietly and crossed to the side door. "In the garden?" "Ready," she said. Callum's voice. "Confirmed. Dex has visual on all 3 cameras. Soren's team is on the north side. Your father is in the lead vehicle." "How many?" "Including the federal team, 41. Your father didn't want to leave anything to chance." She almost laughed. That's very him. "Marlowe." His voice shifted. "Once this starts, it moves fast. You don't have to—" "I know what I have to do," she said. "It's already done. I decided 14 months ago." She ended the call, turned. Theron was in the doorway. The shift in his face was instantaneous. The eye compression and the jaw tightening. She had seen it hundreds of times. She had spent years managing it, adjusting, shrinking, apologizing in advance. Not today. Who was that? Low, controlled. "A friend," she said, and walked past him. His hand found her arm as they moved through the kitchen, tighter than it should be. She felt the 30 guests drifting toward the table ahead of her. Beckett coming in from the backyard, candles being arranged. "Mommy, is it time?" "It's time." She stood at the table. 3 tiers. Ivory fondant, blue stars, the astronaut on top. Theron beside her, hand moving to the small of her back, that specific pressure, ownership dressed as affection. Candles lit. The room began to sing. Beckett squeezed his eyes shut. Theron leaned close. "We will have a conversation about that phone call. Tonight, and after everyone leaves." She said nothing. The song ended. Beckett opened his eyes, and then Theron's hand moved to her hair, and the room went silent, and Marlowe's face went into the cake. And she thought with perfect clarity, There it is. And she held absolutely still while the camera above the fireplace captured every second in high definition. When she lifted her head, blue frosting above her brow, white dress already stained, she did not look at Theron. She looked at the front door, and the front door opened. Stellan Vess walked in first. He was 71 and still moved like a man who believed rooms rearranged themselves around him because they generally did. He didn't look at anyone except his daughter. And when he found her, standing at the birthday table with cake on her face, though something moved through his expression that he did not bother to conceal. He crossed the room in 12 steps and handed her his pocket square without a word. She pressed it to her cheek. Behind him came Callum Reese with a leather portfolio. Behind Callum came 6 attorneys. Behind them came Dex Morrow and his investigative team. And last through the door, holding it for the others, was Soren Vess, 41 years old, 6'2", former FBI, with the specific stillness of someone trained not to move until the moment requires it. He looked at Theron. Theron looked at the room. For the first time in 11 years, Marlowe watched Theron Cade not know what to do next. What is this? Still controlled, still trying. Callum set his portfolio on the dining table and opened it. 3 documents side by side. This is a civil suit for financial fraud and misappropriation of assets from the Meridian Estate Trust. $2.4 million. He tapped the second. This is an emergency restraining order signed this morning by a Connecticut Superior Court judge, removing you from the marital home pending investigation. The third. And this is notification that the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York has opened a federal inquiry into transactions associated with the Preston Graves case. He closed the portfolio. Mr. Cade, you're welcome to contact your attorney. The 30 guests in the room had seen Theron push Marlowe's face into a birthday cake 3 minutes ago. And now her father was here with 6 attorneys and a federal notification on the table. There was no version of misunderstanding available. Beckett came in from the kitchen and crossed the room directly to Marlowe. He pressed his face into her side. She put her arms around him and stood there in the middle of all of it. Documents, attorneys, her father's voice, Theron standing in the corner, and was so grateful for the weight of that small body against hers that she had to breathe very carefully. But then Theron's attorney arrived and filed an emergency motion alleging that the entire proceeding had been orchestrated through fraud and entrapment. And for 48 excruciating hours, the case threatened to unravel in a way no one had planned for. Theron's attorney was named Prescott Dale. He was one of the best criminal defense litigators in New York, and he moved fast. Within 4 hours of the birthday party, Dale had filed an emergency motion in Connecticut Superior Court arguing that the entire proceeding constituted a coordinated entrapment, that Marlowe had been coached and directed to provoke a reaction, that the spontaneous incident had been staged by the Vess legal team, and that any evidence collected at the scene was tainted by pre-planned manipulation. It was a legitimate legal argument, and for 48 hours, it worked. The Connecticut judge issued a temporary hold on the restraining order pending review. Theron was permitted to remain in the Greenwich house. He walked back in on Monday evening, set his briefcase on the kitchen counter, and looked at Marlowe in a way she had not seen before. Not anger, not control, but something more dangerous. Calculation. "You almost had me," he said quietly. Almost. He believed he was winning. He had fought his way out of worse situations. He would frame this as a desperate wife and an overreaching father. He would make Marlowe look unstable, manipulated, coached. And on the surface, 48 hours in, that framing was gaining traction. What Theron didn't know, what Prescott Dale didn't know, was that Dex Morrow had anticipated exactly this move. Among the camera footage from the birthday party was audio, not from the fireplace camera. From a second device, a small recorder placed by a guest named Wendell Park, a former colleague of Dex's, who had attended the party as a neighbor and who had been running audio independently from the moment Theron led Marlowe back inside from the garden. On that recording, Theron's voice was clear. "We will have a conversation about that phone call. And tonight, after everyone leaves." 11 words spoken privately before any incident occurred. Establishing intent, establishing pattern, completely spontaneous, completely unrehearsed, completely devastating to the entrapment argument. Callum submitted it to the court on Wednesday morning. The hold was lifted by noon, and Prescott Dale called Theron that afternoon and said 6 words that ended every version of winning. "The second recording changes everything, Theron." There was a long silence on the line, and then the sound of a man beginning to understand that he had run out of exits. There is a specific silence that falls when a child is about to tell the truth. It happened 3 days after the birthday party, in a room designed to feel like nothing official was occurring. Soft chairs, a window with a garden view. Dr. Anipaula Osi, child specialist, 20 years of legal interview experience, who had a particular way of waiting that put small people at ease. Beckett sat across from her with his hands in his lap. He had been told only that his words mattered and that important people needed to hear them. He took that seriously. Serious was his primary mode. Dr. Osei began with simple questions: his age, his grade, his favorite subject, astronomy, favorite planet, Saturn because of the rings, which he described in accurate and enthusiastic detail for 3 minutes. Then, gently, "Beckett, can you tell me about times at home that made you feel worried?" He thought about it. He was quiet the way children are quiet when deciding whether the adult across from them can handle the answer. "When Daddy uses his quiet voice," he said. "Can you tell me more about that?" "It's not regular quiet," Beckett said. "It's the quiet that means something's going to get worse. I learned the difference when I was little." A pause. "I don't know exactly when, but I know I learned it." He talked for 40 minutes. He talked about the times his mother didn't come down for dinner because she was resting, and how he would bring her water and her eyes would look wrong. He talked about the locked office door and the rule about not interrupting phone calls. He described the birthday party with a clarity and internal consistency that Dr. Osei later noted in her professional report as striking. At the end, he said, "My mom never cried in front of me. I think she thought I couldn't tell." A small pause. "I could always tell. I just didn't know what to do about it. I'm glad the grown-ups do now." Dr. Osei's report was 42 pages. Callum read it twice on a Thursday evening in his empty office, then called Marlowe and said, "Beckett is going to be okay. He was already okay. He just needed the world around him to catch up to what he already knew." And Marlowe stood in her mother's Manhattan kitchen and pressed her free hand flat against the counter and made a sound she had been holding in for 11 years. Not grief, not relief, but something between them that finally had somewhere to go. 2 weeks after the birthday party, Juniper Lane sat across a conference table from 2 federal investigators and the head of professional conduct for the New York State Bar Association. She had sent Marlowe the full Cayman documentation before retaining her own attorney. Routing numbers on opening documents. 4 years of transaction history. Callum later described it as the most rational decision Juniper Lane had made in 2 years. The documentation confirmed the Graves transfer. It also confirmed something investigators had suspected. Theron had used the Cayman account to pay a court clerk in Bergen County, New Jersey, someone who had expedited favorable paperwork in 3 cases without proper review. Obstruction. That made the federal case significantly more serious. Juniper gave a full statement. She described 18 months in documented detail. She described the $85,000 payment, not what she had been told it was for, but what she eventually understood. Her silence about what she had seen on Theron's personal drive before he knew she had looked. She cooperated fully. In exchange, the Bar Association agreed not to pursue license revocation, a suspension and mandatory ethics retraining instead. She was not prosecuted. The investigators across the table from her were experienced enough to understand the difference between someone ensnared by careful manipulation and someone who had sought out harm. On her way out, she passed Dex Morrow in the lobby. She stopped. "I know you have no reason to believe this, but I didn't know about the Cayman account until 6 weeks ago. I didn't understand what the payment actually meant until I found the drive." Dex looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said. "We confirmed the timeline. That's why you're walking out of here." Garrett Vess was confronted by Stellan in the presence of Callum and 2 witnesses. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. Garrett did not deny the account, and he offered no explanation that held. He resigned from Vess Capital the next day. What he didn't know was that the same morning he cleaned out his office, a grand jury in the Southern District of New York was reviewing his transaction records. He was indicted 6 weeks later. Stellan Vess did not issue a statement. He did not need to. The work that had been done quietly over 26 months was speaking with complete clarity on its own. Theron Cade lost the Greenwich house first. The restraining order held, and within 3 weeks, he had relocated to the Midtown apartment, smaller than he remembered, now that it was all he had. He lost the Preston Graves case. Graves terminated representation the morning after the federal inquiry notification. None of the Cayman account was frozen before Theron's attorney finished the paperwork to contest it. He lost 2 partners at his firm within a week, both concerned about liability and association. 3 major clients followed within the month. The firm, which had taken 14 years to build, began fracturing in the quiet way of things that look solid until they don't. He lost Prescott Dale's confidence. After the second audio recording emerged, Dale's strategy shifted from aggressive to damage limitation. That is a different kind of attorney-client relationship. Theron recognized the shift immediately and did not like what it told him. His attorneys filed every reasonable motion available to them. They argued the birthday incident was isolated, emotionally charged, unrepresentative of his parenting capacity. They asked for financial allegations to be separated from custody matters. All of it was reasonable. None of it worked. Because Callum Reese had 42 pages from Dr. Paula Osei, documented estate transfers, a Cayman account, a Bergen County clerk, a second audio recording, and 14 months of Marlowe's handwritten notes from a journal hidden inside a boot. The custody hearing lasted 2 days. Marlowe received primary physical custody. Theron was granted supervised visitation, reviewable in 12 months. The court appointed a guardian ad litem for Beckett. The federal trial began 8 months later in Manhattan. The jury convicted on financial fraud charges and 2 counts of obstruction. The Bergen County clerk pled guilty separately and cooperated with prosecutors. Theron was sentenced to 9 years. His law license was revoked, and the firm closed. The Greenwich house sold, proceeds placed in a trust for Beckett. On the day the verdict came in, Marlowe was at a school in Brooklyn, Third grade, the same grade she had left 11 years before. Callum texted one word: convicted. She was in the middle of reading aloud to 8-year-olds. She finished the page before she allowed herself to feel it. That was the kind of woman she had become. Someone who kept her promises to the children in front of her even when the rest of her life was finally, after 11 years, falling into exactly the right place. A month after the verdict, Stellan Vess filed paperwork dissolving the fake bankruptcy and restoring Vess Capital to full operational status. The Wall Street Journal ran a follow-up. The headline was considerably less dramatic than the original, as Stellan did not give interviews. What he did instead was show up on a Saturday in June at the Brooklyn apartment Marlowe and Beckett had moved into 2 months before. He brought bags from the Atlantic Avenue farmers market, tomatoes, corn, and a very specific local honey that Beckett had requested by text. He stood in the doorway until Marlowe opened it. She said, "Come in, Dad." The kitchen was small, nothing like Greenwich, nothing like the Connecticut house where she had grown up. A round table with 4 mismatched chairs, a window overlooking a fire escape, and the Brooklyn skyline warm in morning light. Beckett still asleep. Stellan sat down, folded his hands on the table. "I should have moved faster," he said, "when your mother called me about that Christmas. I waited too long before I acted." "You moved carefully," Marlowe said. "If you'd moved fast, he would have had time to protect himself." "Yes, that's what I told myself. It's true, Dad. It's also true that you spent 3 years believing I was gone." He looked at her directly. The same look she gave Beckett when she needed him to actually hear something. "I'm sorry for that. The plan required it. I believe it was necessary. And I am still sorry." She was quiet. "Some part of me trusted you wouldn't actually disappear," she said finally. "You just moved to a different position." He nodded once. Then Beckett appeared in the doorway in pajamas, wearing a shirt that said, "Saturn is superior" in block letters, and announced, "Grandpa, did you bring the honey?" Stellan stood and reached into the bag. "I brought 3 kinds. You're going to have to determine which is best." Beckett accepted this as a research assignment and sat down at the table with great seriousness. And Marlowe stood at the counter watching her father open honey jars for her son, and understood for the first time in years what it felt like to be inside a morning that was. Without effort, without management, without survival. Simply good. Callum Reese had worked with Stellan Vess for 16 years. He had handled 3 major corporate restructurings, 2 acquisitions, 1 hostile takeover, and 1 elaborate fake bankruptcy. He was not a man who got attached to cases. He was precise, methodical, and he kept professional distance with the deliberateness of someone who understood what happened when that distance collapsed. He had started losing it, he realized, somewhere around month 4 of the Cade case. It wasn't dramatic. It showed up in small ways. He found himself rereading Marlowe's documentation more carefully than the case required. He thought about the conversation in his office, the way she'd sat down and said, "What do we have?" before he'd offered her water, with a frequency that was not professionally justified. He did his job. He called her with the verdict. He handled the custody filing, the asset recovery, the Garrett Vess federal referral. And he was less sure he was doing his job on a Thursday evening in September when he called her not about the case was largely concluded, but to ask if she had found good coffee near the Brooklyn apartment. She had laughed. First time he had heard her laugh without something complicated underneath it. "The coffee is excellent. I've been there 3 times this week." "That's a concerning level of loyalty for somewhere you've known a month." "I'm a very loyal person," she said. "Once I find something good." A pause. Both recognized it. Neither named it. "I have something I want to ask," he said. "Not about the case." "I know," she said. "I've been trying to figure out the appropriate amount of time." "Callum, it's been 14 months of you being the most reliable person in a situation designed to be unreliable. I think we're past the appropriate amount of time." He was quiet for a moment. "Dinner, not work. Somewhere that doesn't serve anything resembling birthday cake." She laughed again. Real, unqualified, the laugh of someone who has earned the right to find things funny. "Saturday. Beckett will be with my mother. I'll send the address. I'll bring good coffee. Don't push it." After she hung up, Callum sat in his empty office looking at the city lights below and felt something that had not happened to him in a professional context in 16 years. He felt like the case he had just closed was not the end of the story. It was, unmistakably, the beginning of a different one, entirely. On a Tuesday in June, Marlowe stood in front of 22 third graders and said, "Today we're going to talk about what makes something true." A boy named Oscar raised his hand immediately. He always did. He had opinions on everything and a collection of deep-sea creature facts he worked into unrelated conversations with impressive commitment. "True means it really happened," he said before she called on him. "That's one kind of true. What's another?" A girl named Priya said, "True means you can count on it, like gravity." "Yes," Marlowe said, "like gravity." She wrote it on the board. Reliable, consistent, present whether you're paying attention or not. After school, she walked 4 blocks to the coffee place on Smith Street. Oat milk latte, the same table by the window. 20 minutes of quiet with the street outside and nothing she had to manage inside it. This was new. The quiet mind. She was still learning to let it exist without waiting for something to go wrong inside it. Beckett was in 2nd grade 3 blocks away. He had 2 close friends. He was in a Saturday astronomy club at the Brooklyn Public Library that Stellan attended without exception, regardless of weather or board meetings. Beckett had told his friend Owen that his grandfather knew everything about space. Stellan had elected to simply live up to this. Soren came for dinner the last Sunday of every month. He and Beckett played chess. Beckett lost every time and found this deeply motivating. Odette visited Thursdays. Callum had keys. He had asked her on a November Saturday in the West Village whether she would consider marrying him. Not on any particular timeline, just as a direction. She had said yes before he finished the sentence. Not because she had been rescued. She had not been rescued. She had built the plan. She had held still when holding still cost everything. She had documented her own life from inside a locked-down marriage, called her father at 3 in the morning and said, "I'm ready, chosen," and then kept choosing every day since. She finished her coffee. Outside, Brooklyn moved through its afternoon. Delivery trucks and strollers, and 2 teenagers arguing cheerfully over a shared phone, and a dog walking with great dignity at a very slow pace. Marlowe watched all of it. Then she put on her coat and walked back out into the world. Not because someone had made it safe, but because she had stopped waiting for someone else to do that. And because the woman she had become while surviving the one she used to be was, finally and completely, more than enough. And so the story ends here. But hey, if you're still with us right now, at this very moment, that tells me something real. Because people don't stay for a story unless something in it is touching a part of them they haven't fully put into words yet. Maybe you've been Marlowe before. Maybe you've held yourself together in a quiet kitchen while your whole world was falling apart. And nobody around you even knew. Maybe you've been the person who kept showing up kept being steady, kept doing the right thing, even when the right thing cost you everything first. The Stoics believed that we cannot control what happens to us, only how we respond. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, alone, eyes with no audience. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Marlowe didn't win because the world became fair. She won because she refused to let unfair become her identity. Here's what this story really taught us. Silence is not weakness. Preparation is not revenge. And the people who underestimate a quiet woman are always the ones most surprised by what she built while they weren't watching. If this story meant something to you today, if even one moment made you feel seen, please hit that like button right now. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. We tell stories like this because you show up for them. And we're not going anywhere. See you in the next one. Before you go, a quick note for everyone still here with us. Swear this entire story, every character, every name, every situation you just experienced, is completely fictional. Marlowe, Theron, Beckett, Stellan, Odette, Juniper, Callum, Dex, Soren, Garrett, and every other person you met today exist only in the story. They are not based on any real individual, living or deceased. The events, legal proceedings, financial details, companies, and locations depicted are all created purely for dramatic storytelling. Nothing in this story is intended to represent real people, real court cases, or real incidents of any kind. Any resemblance to actual persons or events is entirely coincidental and unintentional. This content exists for one purpose only: to entertain, to inspire reflection, and to remind every person watching that their own story is still being written. Thank you for watching with an open heart. Your presence here, all the way to the very end, means more than you know.